Humans silently forged planet-sized warships. The galaxy caught off guard completely. The Velarin delegate did not know how to say Earth. He tried twice, got it wrong both times, smiled in the way that powerful people smile when they do not think an apology is necessary, and moved on. I was 22, sitting in the press gallery above the grand chamber of the Galactic Compact, holding a notebook I would not close for the next 60 years. I wrote 2 words. Noted filed. My name is Claire Ward. I was assigned as junior archivist to humanity's first diplomatic delegation to the Galactic Compact, which means I was one of 4 humans in that chamber who did not have to pretend the mispronunciation was acceptable. The other 3 were diplomats. Pretending was their job. Mine was to write things down. So I wrote things down. The ceremony was called the induction of new civilizations into the Galactic Compact. The Compact had been running these ceremonies for roughly 400 years. They had a rhythm to them. The senior member, which was the Velarin Collective, which had been senior member for as long as the Compact had existed, would read the induction charter. The new civilization's representative would sign. Everyone would applaud in whatever manner their biology permitted. There would be a reception. We signed. They applauded. The delegate from the Dresh hegemony, a species that communicated partly through color changes in their neck frills, presented humanity with a gift. The frills were amber and violet, which their cultural liaison translated as warmth and gentle encouragement. The gift was a box. Inside the box was a beginner's guide to interstellar navigation and a star atlas printed in Dresh, with small annotated symbols marking the locations of what the atlas called civilizations in developmental stages. Earth was marked with a symbol that translated, roughly, as potential. I put the box under my chair. I left the bow on it. I kept looking at the bow for the rest of the ceremony. The bow was gold and pressed flat, and it had a small card attached that said, "With best hopes for your journey." The bow was where I kept what I was feeling, pressed flat, filed. After the reception, I went back to the delegation's quarters and wrote 3 pages of detailed observations about the ceremony. Every dismissal, every moment of condescension dressed up as courtesy. Every time, a Velarin official looked past a human diplomat to speak to the Caliph representative standing behind them, because the Caliph had been Compact members for 60 years and were therefore worth directing eye contact at. I filed it all. That was my job. It was 3 years later, year 3 of humanity's membership in the Compact, when everything changed direction. Admiral Helen Grant called a meeting with 7 people. I was one of them, the only non-military presence in the room, which told me this was a meeting that needed a witness more than it needed a plan. Helen put one question on the screen. What can we do that no one is watching us do? The room was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of people who do not have answers. The quiet of people who are deciding which answer to say out loud first. Owen Ellis, who had the specific kind of stillness that belongs to engineers who have been thinking about a problem for longer than the meeting they are sitting in, said one word. Anything. Helen did not smile. She pulled up a star map and circled a region in the outer system, past the last recognized boundary of human space, past the belt, past the transit lanes, into the long dark nothing that sat beyond everything we had claimed and everything the Compact monitored. The Uit cloud, 7.5 trillion kilometers from the sun, cold, empty, uninteresting to everyone who was not specifically looking for it. Perfect. The doctrine was named Hearthstone. I named it, actually. Nobody asked me to. I was writing up the meeting notes and the name appeared in my head the way names sometimes do, fully formed, and I put it on the cover of the file. Helen saw it the next morning and did not change it. The official doctrine was 3 sentences. We will not ask permission. We will not announce capability. We will build in the dark and we will build big. I was assigned as Hearthstone's archivist. Helen told me I was writing this for whoever came after. She said it the way people say things when they already understand that they will not live to see the ending. She was right, she did not. I was 25 years old when Owen Ellis stood in front of a blank wall in a classified room on Earth Station 1 and drew the rough dimensions of what would become the first vessel. He did not use precise measurements that day. He just drew a shape. It was roughly the size of a moon. He tapped the drawing with one finger and said, "We can do this in 80 years. Maybe less if we are committed." Committed, that was the word he used. We were committed. The cover story was ice capture. Humanity was constructing long-range infrastructure for deep-field resource extraction. Boring. Necessary. Exactly the kind of activity that makes compact monitoring officials stop reading mid-report and move on to something more interesting. We had learned something important in those first 3 years of membership. The compact was very good at watching for threats they already understood. They were not good at watching for things that did not look threatening. Ice capture operations looked like ambition but not like danger, so ice capture it was. Year 6. First structural components transported to the outer construction field, disguised within a legal ice capture convoy. Nobody stopped us at the transit lane checkpoints. The compact auditor who reviewed the filing that quarter noted that humanity was showing admirable industrial initiative. Owen sent me a copy of that review with no message attached, just the quote circled. I put it in the archive. I put everything in the archive. That was the deal. Every decision, every calculation, every name of every person who touched this thing and kept their mouth shut, which was everyone, which was all 4,312,000 of them over the century that followed. 4 million people. Not one word. I have thought about this more than I have thought about the ships themselves. The ships were steel and mathematics. The silence was a human thing, and human things are harder to build. But we built it. The first frame strut of what would become the warship Grandmother was laid in year 7 of Hearthstone, 3,400 kilometers long. I noted it in the archive the same way I noted everything. The Dresch Hegemony's gift box sat in my quarters with the bow still on it. I did not open it. I looked at it sometimes and thought about the word on the atlas. Potential. They had no idea. Owen Ellis used to say that the hardest part of a century-long project is that no single human being can carry the whole thing in their head. He was right. He had been right about most things, which is part of why his death, 31 years in, hit the project the way a structural fault hits a bridge. Not catastrophically, not immediately, but in a way you feel before you fully understand. He died in year 38 of Hearthstone, heart failure. He was 71. He had spent the last decade of his life in the outer construction field, living aboard a converted transport vessel that he refused to redecorate because he claimed comfort was a distraction. His funeral was held inside Grandmother's unfinished primary bay. The bay was 900 kilometers across. Owen's casket was a small dark rectangle in the center of it. The ceiling above him was exposed framework, ribs of dark alloy curving up and disappearing into the dark, and through the gaps in the frame you could see the outer construction lights, still running, because the work did not stop for the funeral, because Owen would not have wanted it to, and everyone knew it. 900 kilometers, one casket. The scale felt right. I stood at the back of the gathered personnel, 2,000 people, which looked like nothing in that bay, and wrote in the archive. I described the bay dimensions. I described the lighting. I noted the attendance figure and the time. I did not write what it felt like. That was not my job. The project passed to a woman named Patricia Cole, lead structural engineer, 44 years old, who had grown up watching her father work on the outer construction field, and had joined the project at 19 and had never once considered doing anything else. Patricia did not have Owen's stillness. She had a different quality. She moved fast and talked fast and made decisions fast and was always right about 3/4 of them and spent the remaining quarter fixing what the first 3/4 had caused, which still put her ahead of most engineers. Under Patricia, the pace changed. Owen had built Hearthstone like a cathedral, one stone at a time, generationally patient. Patricia built it like someone who had been told there was a deadline and intended to meet it. The second vessel, which would be called the Patient One, was begun in year 40, before Grandmother was even half complete. The third and fourth were begun in year 45, the fifth and sixth in year 50, the seventh and eighth in year 58. 8 simultaneous construction fields, spread across a region of outer space the size of a small star system. All of it disguised as ice capture. The compact audited the operation 4 times during this period. Each audit found the same thing: human long-range resource infrastructure, consistent with a developing civilization building for future economic expansion. Nothing extraordinary. The auditors were not stupid. They were simply not looking for this, because this was not the kind of thing that fit inside the frameworks they had built for civilizations like ours. We were supposed to be at least 300 years from anything like Grandmother. Their models said so. We had checked. The engineering problems were extraordinary. I am not an engineer, so I will tell you only what I was told. Building a vessel the size of a small planet is a problem of scale that does not respond well to conventional solutions. The gravity systems alone required a completely new approach to mass management. The propulsion systems required drive technology that, at the time of Hearthstone's founding, did not exist. The weapons systems required rethinking assumptions about energy discharge at a scale that made most theoretical models refuse to calculate. All of it was solved. Not quickly, not easily, not by any one person. Year 52. A 23-year-old engineer from Cardiff named Kate Ford was working on the gravity-fold drive problem for ship-scale application. She had been assigned to it at 21, which meant the project's leadership had handed her a problem they believed was solvable and a timeline they believed was ambitious and essentially said, "Go." Kate Ford solved it in 18 months. The solution was not what anyone expected. It applied a principle from deep-field astrophysics, the way certain large stellar objects maintain gravitational coherence during rotation, and translated it through a chain of mathematical reasoning that takes 400 pages to follow, into an engine design. The engine worked, it scaled, it could move Grandmother. Kate received a classified commendation and had her name added to Grandmother's dedication plate. She told her mother she had been promoted to senior ice processing supervisor. Her mother baked her a cake. I put all of this in the archive: the solution, the 400 pages, the promotion announcement, the cake. Everything went in. Because that was the deal. Everything that happened would be recorded. Not because anyone needed justification. Not because we were afraid of judgment. But because 4 million people did this thing together and they deserved to have it written down correctly. The silence was the hardest part to write about, because silence by definition leaves no record. But I tried. People would ask me sometimes, not directly about Hearthstone, because you did not ask about Hearthstone directly, but in the way people ask about things they are pretending not to know about. How do you keep a secret? How do 4 million people keep a secret? The answer I gave was always the same. You give them something worth keeping. We had not been asked to keep a secret. We had been asked to build something. The secrecy was a condition of the building, not the purpose of it. Every person on the project understood what Grandmother was. They understood what the Patient One was, what the other 6 would be. They understood what it meant for the species they were part of. You do not abandon that. You do not abandon it because abandoning it would undo it, and undoing it would mean handing the galaxy confirmation of what it already suspected: that humanity was not ready, not serious, not capable of the patience required to be taken as an equal. We were done being told we were not ready. Grandmother was 70% complete in year 62. The other vessels ranged from 15 to 45%. The construction pace was accelerating in ways that Patricia Cole had promised, but that still seemed every quarter slightly improbable. I visited the outer construction field for the first time in year 63. I had been running the archive from Earth Station 1 for 40 years. I had written about Grandmother in more detail than any person alive. I had never seen her. The transport brought me in from the sunward side. The pilot, a quiet man named Gary Webb who had been flying supply runs to the outer field for 20 years and had stopped being impressed by the scale of things, said nothing as we approached. He had seen it enough times. He just flew. I saw it. I do not have the right word. What I have is this. I sat in the co-pilot seat with my notebook open and did not write a single thing for 11 minutes. I just looked. Then I wrote the dimensions again. I had written them hundreds of times. 3,400 kilometers for the primary hull. That number had always been a number to me, the way very large numbers are always just numbers when you cannot see them. Now it was a horizon. Gary flew us along the ventral hull, which took 40 minutes at cruising speed, and I watched the hull roll past the viewport like the surface of a world. Which it was. It was the surface of something world-sized, except this world had been built by human hands, human calculations, human silence. We passed Owen Ellis's dedication plate at the 2-hour mark, a small rectangle on a hull that went on forever in every direction. His name, his dates, the words. He asked the right question first. I pressed my notebook flat against the viewport glass, not the same as touching the plate, but close enough for now. We landed. I had work to do. The anomaly report came in on a Tuesday. I remember this because I had been eating lunch, a plate of rice and chicken that went cold during the 11 minutes it took me to read the initial report, and because the Tuesday detail felt irrelevant at first, and then essential, and then it became simply the kind of small fact that nails a memory to a specific place in time. The Compact's Deep Field Survey drone, designated VLR-1147, had clipped the outer electromagnetic boundary of the grandmother construction field at year 98 of Hearthstone. It had been on a routine mapping pass of what the Compact's charts designated as an uninhabited deep field zone, which was accurate, technically, if you did not count the 4 million people working there. The drone sensor array had returned 17 seconds of visual data before grandmother's electronic countermeasure suite cut the feed. 17 seconds. In those 17 seconds, the drone had captured visual confirmation of a large, geometrically regular structure of obviously artificial origin, with attached construction equipment operating at industrial scale, in a region of space that was supposed to contain nothing more interesting than ice. The Compact's Deep Field Analysis Office, which processed roughly 2,000 anomaly reports a month, and had a staff of 14 flagged VLR-1147's return as a possible large-mass natural object, possible artificial feature, low confidence, low priority, no action required. Low priority. I read that line 4 times. The system worked. It worked not because we had fooled anyone. The data was there. The 17 seconds were clear enough that a careful analyst could have extracted useful information. It worked because no one in the Compact's bureaucratic structure was built to imagine a civilization the size and age of humanity doing something this large in this kind of silence. Their frameworks had no room for it. Their models said it was impossible. So it was filed as low priority. We had 8 months maybe. 8 months until someone with too much time or the wrong kind of boredom pulled file VLR-1147 out of the low priority queue and looked at it properly. The Admiralty met within 24 hours of my report reaching Helen Grant's successor, Admiral Daniel Price. Daniel was 60 years old, former combat engineer, the kind of person who gave off the impression that he had already considered the worst possible outcome of any situation and found it workable. He sat at the head of the table in the way that people sit when they have made their decision before the meeting started and are running the meeting as a courtesy to everyone else. I attended as archivist, which meant I sat against the wall, not at the table, and wrote everything down. The options were laid out. First, accelerate completion to maximum pace and finish before the Compact's analysts escalated VLR-1147. Roughly 8 months, brutal conditions, significant risk of detectable activity increase. Second, abandon the construction fields, disperse equipment and personnel, and let a century of work dissolve into the dark. Third, reveal Hearthstone in its current incomplete state. Negotiate from a position of partial capability. Begin the conversation humanity had been building toward for 100 years, but begin it before the fleet was ready, from a weaker hand. 8 people at the table. The vote was taken at the 40-minute mark. 8-0. Accelerate. I do not know if anyone at that table felt something when they voted. They did not show it. They did not show it because they were military officers who had spent their careers preparing for exactly this kind of decision, and because showing it would have cost them something they needed for what came next. What I know is that when Daniel Price stood up from the table, he put both hands flat on its surface, looked at the door for a moment, and then walked out without saying anything else. That was the whole of it. The word went out to the construction fields in encrypted packets, dressed in logistics language, distributed through 18 relay points, so no single intercept could carry the whole message. The actual content was 4 words. Move the timeline up. 4 million people did not ask why. They just moved. My notes from year 99 are longer than any other year in the archive because everything was happening faster than I could organize it. Shifts extended. Supply convoys ran continuous loops. Personnel who had been scheduled for rotation back to inter-system stations stayed. Nobody was ordered to stay. Nobody left. The patient one came online first. She had been closest to completion when the acceleration began. Her final structural phase took 19 days. Her drive systems ran full diagnostics in 11. She was certified flight-ready in 32 days, which was a figure that Patricia Cole, still alive at 91 and still furious about everything that was not done correctly, called acceptable under the circumstances. Grandmother came online 3 days later. Then the ship called Old Teeth, named by the generation of workers who had built her middle hull decades ago, and had a specific sense of humor about the whole thing. Then 5 more, each named by the hands that finished them. They were not given imposing names. They were not named for gods or battles or grand gestures. They were named the way you name things that belong to you. Grandmother, the patient one, Old Teeth, Long Road, Night Keeper, the quiet machine, Carry On, the last argument. The last name was Daniel's idea. He gave no explanation. I filed it without comment. On the final day of year 99, all 8 vessels were certified flight-ready. I was standing in Grandmother's primary observation bay when the certification came through. The bay was large enough that sound did not carry well. The 200 personnel present when the announcement ran through the internal channel reacted in ways that did not translate across the distance. I could see them moving. I could not hear it. I walked to the forward viewport. Through it was the outer construction field, still lit with work lights that had been running for nearly 100 years, and beyond the lights was the dark, and beyond the dark was the rest of the galaxy, which did not yet know what it was about to see. I spent a long time at that viewport. What I felt was more like the end of holding your breath, a long exhale that had been building for 60 years. I found Owen's dedication played on my way back to the archive bay. I had walked that corridor 20 times and never stopped at it. I stopped now. I put one hand flat against it. Cold, smooth, his name and his dates. He asked the right question first. I stood there for about 30 seconds. Then I went back to work. On the first morning of year 100, Daniel Price gave the order. The fleet moved. What does it look like when 8 planet-sized ships enter populated space? The answer is that it looks at first like a stellar event. The Compact's early warning network, which stretched across the central arm of the galaxy in a web of monitoring buoys, relay stations, and automated sensor platforms, detected the gravity fold signatures at 600 hours, Compact Standard Time, on the first day of year 100. The signatures were enormous, each one red like a brown dwarf. The automated system flagged them as possible stellar drift anomalies, cross-referenced them against known star charts, found no matches, and escalated the report to the duty officer on the compact's central monitoring station, orbiting Velarin Prime. He looked at the 8 signatures on his display. He looked at their positions, which formed a perfect geometric ring around the outer boundary of compact central space. He looked at the scale readings. He called his supervisor. His supervisor looked at the display for a moment, then called his supervisor. This process continued up 4 levels of authority before someone decided to point an optical telescope at one of the signatures. The visual confirmation came back in 6 minutes. The duty officer's recorded words, which are now part of the official compact archive, were, "That is a ship. Those are all ships. Someone tell me those are not all ships." Nobody told him that. I was watching the compact's emergency frequency from grandmother's communications bay when it lit up. I have been in noisy rooms before. I had never been in a room that was listening to the kind of noise coming through those channels in the first hour after visual confirmation. Every major compact member government reacting at once. Military channels, diplomatic channels, civilian government channels. The Dresh hegemony moving battle groups before anyone had issued an order, because the Dresh operated on the principle that if something large appeared without warning in your neighborhood, you moved first and understood it later. The Velarin Grand Council convened an emergency session in 12 minutes, the fastest convening in the compact's 400-year history. I noted it in the archive. The first question recorded from that session, from a senior council member whose family line traced directly back to the delegate who had mispronounced Earth at our induction ceremony 60 years earlier, was not "What do they want?" It was not "Are they hostile?" It was not even "How many?" The first question was how. How had we done it? How had this happened without a warning, without a rumor, without a single intelligence report, a single defection, a single piece of intercepted communication? How? I wrote the word in the archive, then wrote underneath it, "Their imagination was the lid on their curiosity," then deleted that part because this was an official record. I kept the thought. The 8 ships held position. Daniel had given this order with specific language: hold position, make no aggressive gestures, do not activate weapon systems, do not respond to hails except through the designated channel. Wait. For the first 4 hours, the compact ran every long-range sensor they had. They mapped the fleet, measured it, ran calculations on hull mass, drive signatures, and structural configurations. The data confirmed what their optical telescopes had already shown them, but confirming it with numbers seemed to be something they needed before they could fully believe it. The numbers were not comforting. Grandmother alone had a hull mass comparable to a large moon, and a drive output that the Velarin's best scientists initially calculated as theoretically impossible. The same scientists revised that conclusion approximately 90 minutes into their analysis, when the data refused to accommodate any alternative explanation. Not impossible, just not done before. Not by anyone they had been watching. The Dresh hegemony stood their battle groups down at the 6-hour mark, when it became clear the ships had not moved and showed no intention of moving. The compact's emergency diplomatic corps made contact with humanity's inter-system government at the 7-hour mark. The conversation at the diplomatic level was, by all accounts, somewhat disorganized. Humanity's diplomats were prepared for it. The compact's diplomats were not prepared for anything about this day, which put both sides of the conversation in very different positions. At the 9-hour mark, the compact's senior diplomatic representative, a Velarin official I will refer to simply as the senior diplomat, hailed grandmother directly. The compact had done their research in those 9 hours. They knew grandmother was the lead vessel. They knew she was the first completed. They knew the history of her construction. The call went to the communications bay. I took it. Not Daniel, me. Daniel had made this decision 3 days before the fleet launched when he called me into his office and said, "You are taking the first hail. You are the archivist. It is your record. You should answer for it." I did not disagree. The senior diplomat's voice came through the translation system flat and deliberate. The Velarin modulate emotion through frequencies the translation technology stripped out, so every statement arrived in a level tone regardless of what was underneath it. We were not aware, the senior diplomat said, that humanity possessed this capability. I had written my response in the archive first, the way I wrote everything important, in the record before I said it out loud, so that the record was always the primary version. We know, I said. A pause. We have questions, the senior diplomat said. Yes, I said, I would like to ask some as well. The official negotiation channel opened 6 hours later. Daniel took that session. I sat against the wall and wrote. The compact's opening position was what you might expect from an organization that had just experienced something it had no framework for. They wanted information. They wanted to understand the full scope of what humanity had built, the complete capability inventory, the construction history, the full timeline. Daniel gave them the timeline. He told them to speak to me for the rest. The meeting on day 4 was held face-to-face. The compact's senior diplomatic delegation of 12 arrived at Grandmother by transport and were escorted to the primary bay. They walked through the entrance and stopped. 900 kilometers across. 12 figures standing at the threshold, looking up at the ceiling that curved away and disappeared into the dark, looking sideways at walls that had no visible end. They were very small in that bay, the kind of small that numbers cannot prepare you for. Daniel walked out to meet them from the far side. That walk took him roughly half a kilometer across empty floor. The distance did something that numbers could not. The senior diplomat, when Daniel reached him, said, "This is what 100 years of silence looks like." Daniel said, "Yes." It was the only thing he needed to say. The compact ran capability assessments throughout the first week. Their Dresh hegemony analysts ran 4 separate evaluations of the fleet, each returning slightly more detailed findings than the last, because their models kept identifying things they had missed in the previous pass. Kate Ford's engine solution alone was causing significant disruption across the compact's scientific community. The Dresh had been the leading authority on gravity-fold propulsion for 2 centuries. Kate's 400 pages had advanced the field by an estimated 40 to 60 years. Compact engineering bodies were still working through her derivations at the end of the first week, because they could follow the mathematics, and the mathematics were correct, and the mathematics implied drive capabilities that required several days to fully absorb. A 23-year-old from Cardiff had done in 18 months what 200 years of compact research had not managed. I noted this without additional commentary. Day 7, the compact formally requested a full diplomatic session. Daniel agreed. He set the location as Grandmother's primary bay. Not a neutral station, not a compact facility. Our ship, our terms. The formal address to the Galactic Compact was not delivered by Admiral Daniel Price. It was not delivered by the President of the Human Cooperative Government, or any of the 3 admirals who had commanded Hearthstone at various stages, or by Kate Ford, who had solved the problem that made the fleet possible, or by Patricia Cole, 91 years old and still technically consulting on structural integrity issues, or by any of the 4,300,000 people who had built these ships and kept the silence. It was delivered by me. Claire Ward, archivist, former junior delegation member, the person who had been writing this down since she was 22 years old. Daniel told me the address was mine to give. He said it the same way Helen Grant had told me I was writing this for whoever came after. Matter of fact. Final. He did not explain his reasoning, and I did not ask him to. I had been preparing it for 60 years, in the way you prepare for something you did not know you were preparing for. Every file, every entry, every moment of nodding and filing and moving on without explaining. The address was 47 minutes long. I delivered it from Grandmother's primary communications bay, direct feed to every compact member government, every diplomatic channel, every public frequency the Compact's network could reach. Roughly 400 billion sentient beings across 16 species received it simultaneously, in whatever translation format their languages required. I spoke in the flat, even tone I had used for 60 years of archive work, not because I felt flat, because the document deserved a flat voice, because a flat voice delivering this specific content is a more precise instrument than an emotional one. I began at the beginning. Year 0, the induction ceremony, the mispronounced name, the gift box. I did not editorialize. I described what happened. Dates, names, specific words spoken by specific officials, drawn from the original record. The Compact's own diplomatic transcripts, which I had obtained through completely legal archival exchange requests over 60 years, provided much of the documentation. I read them, their own words back to them. Not as accusation, as record. I described the cultural development package, the star atlas, the symbol that meant potential. I described every audit that had cleared our construction activities. I read the auditor's exact language, admirable industrial initiative, consistent with developmental stage expansion. No action required. I described Owen Ellis's question and the Admiralty's answer. I described Kate Ford's engine solution. I described the 4 million workers and the 3 generations of silence. I described Owen's funeral in the 900-kilometer bay, his casket a small dark rectangle in the center of it. I described everything. When I reached the section on the delivery of the Hearthstone archive to the Compact's Central Records office, I paused, just briefly. The full archive, I said, contains the name, contribution record, and confirmed personal history of every individual who participated in Project Hearthstone from year 1 to year 100. 4,312,847 people. Their names are on record. They did this. They should be known. I let that sit for a moment. Then I moved to the terms. Humanity's terms were not what the Compact expected. I know this because the diplomatic frequency traffic that came through in the hours following the address showed a consistent pattern of confusion, followed by a second read-through, followed by more confusion. They expected demands, territory, resources, dominant voting weight, the kinds of things that powerful civilizations had historically extracted from the Compact when they arrived with sufficient leverage to ask for whatever they wanted. We did not ask for territory. We did not ask for resources. We did not ask for tribute or apology or symbolic acknowledgement of our capability. We asked for one thing: restructured representation in the Compact's governing assembly, voting weight proportional to demonstrated capability rather than civilization age, a new framework for what counted as capability, not years of membership, not volume of claimed space, not rate of expansion, but demonstrated achievement, scientific contribution, problem-solving capacity, industrial output, the things that could be measured against results rather than against time. Under the old framework, humanity was a developmental stage member, minimal voting weight, advisory status in most governance chambers. Under the proposed framework, evaluated by the metrics we had specified, humanity ranked in the top 4 of all Compact member civilizations. We had done the math. We had included the math in the proposal. We had included, as an appendix, 6 independent verification methods for each metric. We had been thorough. We had had 100 years to prepare. The Compact had 2 weeks to ratify or decline. The 8 ships held position. I went back to writing. The 2 weeks were not quiet. The diplomatic channels ran continuously. The Compact's member governments argued with each other, with their own internal factions, with their scientific advisory bodies, with their legal interpretation chambers. The Velarin held 11 emergency sessions in the first week alone. The Dresh ran 4 separate capability assessments of the Hearthstone fleet, each one returning findings slightly more detailed than the last, because their analysts kept identifying things they had missed in the previous pass. Kate Ford's drive solution was still causing disruption. Compact engineering bodies were still working through her derivations at the close of the first week. Because they could follow the mathematics, and the mathematics were correct, and the mathematics implied things that required several days to fully absorb. On day 9, I received a communication from a Caliph scientist, the Caliph being 60-year compact members who had been generally well-disposed toward humanity, and who had been the only delegation at the original induction ceremony to pronounce Earth correctly. She wanted to formally request access to the full Hearthstone archive for research purposes. I approved the request immediately. The archive was a public document that had been intentional. If we were going to change the compact, we were going to do it by showing our work. On day 11, the vote was called. 31 in favor, 4 opposed. The 4 dissenting votes were all Velarin seats. Noted. The ratification transmitted across the Compact's network at 1400 hours, Compact Standard Time. Grandmother's Communications Bay registered the confirmation at 1404. I sat in my chair in the archive bay and looked at the wall of files around me. 100 years of records, stacked and cataloged and cross-referenced. Every name, every year, every problem solved by a person who believed it was solvable without ever seeing the end result. I looked at them for a while. Then I went to my quarters. The Dresh Hegemony's gift box was on the shelf above my workstation, where it had sat for 60 years. The bow was still on it, gold and pressed flat, the small card with the best hopes for our journey. I had moved the box 17 times over 60 years, station to station, assignment to assignment, from Earth Station 1 to the outer construction field to Grandmother's archive bay to my current quarters. Every move, the box came with me. Every move, the bow intact. I sat down and looked at it. I thought about the 22-year-old in the press gallery who had put it under her chair and decided to keep what she was feeling pressed flat, filed, pointed somewhere useful rather than somewhere loud. I thought about whether she would recognize me. I picked up the box. I opened it. Inside was the beginner star atlas, hand-illustrated in Dresh, which I could now read fluently, having learned it in year 12 because I thought it might be useful and I had been right. The illustrations were detailed and careful, clearly made by someone who loved the subject. The galaxy laid out in ink, stars named in Dresh script, systems annotated with information about their contents and their civilizations. Earth system was near the inner arm, a small sun, 4 rocky planets, 1 inhabited. The annotation was 1 Dresh character. Potential. I turned the atlas over in my hands. I found the page for Velarin Prime, ancient, senior, the oldest member of the Compact with a history of spaceflight stretching back 12,000 years. The annotation for Velarin was a long string of characters. It said central pillar of civilization, holder of long memory, first among equals. I thought about the duty officer who had looked at 8 planet-sized ships on his display and called his supervisor. I thought about the senior diplomat who had asked how. I thought about 11 emergency sessions in the first week, 4 dissenting votes, not how, not why. How? They were still asking how. I closed the atlas carefully. I put it back in the box. I set the box on the shelf. The bow I left off. I went back to the archive bay and opened a new file. The new file was the first entry in what would become the post-Hearthstone archive. Everything that had come before was the record of building. Everything that followed would be the record of what we did with what we had built. I began the way I always began, the way Helen Grant had taught me to begin, the way the discipline of archiving demands that you begin. With what happened exactly, no more. Year 1 of the post-Hearthstone period. Compact ratification confirmed. 8 vessels certified and operational, holding position in compact central space pending formal assignment. Representation framework under implementation review. Kate Ford's drive solution accepted for publication in the Compact's open scientific record. Effective date, today. I paused, added one more line. The record is complete to this point. It will continue. Then I thought about something Daniel had said on day 4, when he came back from the face-to-face meeting and sat across from me in the archive bay and said nothing for a full minute before speaking. They kept asking how, he had said, they cannot understand the silence. I had told him their model of how a civilization behaves had no room for what we did. He had looked at the archive bays around us, floor to ceiling, 100 years of records, and said, then their model needed updating. I added a final paragraph to the opening entry. Note for future readers of this archive, and for anyone reviewing the history of Project Hearthstone who wishes to understand its essential nature. 4,300,000 people kept this project a secret for 100 years. They did not do it because they were ordered to. They did not do it because they feared consequences. They did it because they were given something worth doing, and they understood that doing it quietly was the only way to do it at all. If you are looking for the most significant achievement of Project Hearthstone, it is not the ships. It is this. This is what we built first. Everything else was made possible because we built this first. I saved the file. I went to the viewport in the archive bay. Through it I could see the edge of one of Grandmother's secondary hull sections, and beyond that the dark, and beyond the dark, closer than it had ever been, the warm scattered light of the galaxy's inner arm. Grandmother was going to move soon. All 8 of them were. Back toward the center, back toward the inhabited systems, back toward the part of the galaxy that was now going to have to figure out what to do with us. With our ships, with our seats at the table, with our votes and our voices, and 400 pages of drive solutions, and 100 years of silence that nobody could fit into any model they had. I thought about Helen Grant, who had circled the Uit cloud on a star map 60 years ago and asked the right question. I thought about Owen Ellis, who had said one word and meant it more than most people mean a sentence. I thought about Kate Ford and her mother's cake. I thought about Patricia Cole, who would be furious at her characterization in this archive, and whom I planned to let read it before finalizing anything, because she had earned that. I thought about 4,300,000 people who had gone to work every day on something they would not live to see finished, and had gone anyway, and had said nothing, and had handed the next person whatever they had managed to get done, and had trusted that the person after that would do the same. They had been right to trust. The light from the inner arm was very steady through the viewport. Old light, the kind of light that had been traveling a long time to get here. We had been traveling a long time too. Grandmother's drive systems came online with a vibration I could feel through the floor but not quite hear. The kind of thing that was below sound but above silence, a feeling rather than a noise. She was moving. I sat down at my workstation. I opened the archive. I kept writing.